Greetings. In this video, we're going to go over the second example that is in the quadratic formula notes. As you can tell, you have x squared minus 3x minus 7. If you recall from the warm-up you should have done today, if you factor or try to factor x squared minus 3x minus 7, that was not able to be factored, right? Because there's no two integers that add to negative 3 and multiply up to negative 7. So this is a great example as to where the quadratic formula is going to be necessary to be able to solve this equation for x. It can't be factored, but it can be solved by using your quadratic formula, which is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Right, that should be in the top part in your notes when you're working through these examples. Right, so opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Again, this only works when something is written in standard form, which this is. This is an x squared minus 3x minus 7 equal to 0. Right, so it's got to equal 0 in order to use this quadratic formula. So this does, so you have to find your a value first, which should be 1. Your b value is negative 3, and your c value is negative 7. So 1, because there's a 1x squared, negative 3x minus 7. So now we're going to put that into our quadratic formula. Remember, we say that's the opposite of b, so that's where we're going to start. So we start with the opposite of b. b is a negative 3, so now this is a positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of all of b squared. So I'm going to use parentheses. Parentheses are important. So that's negative 3 squared minus 4 times a 1 times a negative 7. Because c is negative 7. And that's all over 2 times 1 because a is equal to 1. So our work now is to simplify this. So simplify mainly this inside part of that square root. That's where the bulk of our work is. So 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared. Now why I use parentheses here is because this is a negative 3 times a negative 3. Make sure you get a positive 9 for that. You might use your calculator and plug in negative 3 squared and get a negative 9, but it's got to be positive because you're squaring it. Minus, now we have 4 times 1 times a negative 7. Well, 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times a negative 7 is a negative 28. Notice how I use a parentheses here because this minus came from this spot. This product gave me a negative 28. And that's all over 2 because it's 2 times 1. So now we continue to simplify inside that square root. So positive 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus a negative. And of course, subtracting a negative means that you can add those two things. So you have 9 plus 28, which would be equal to 37. And that's all over 2. Normally, we would say, now you got to simplify the square root. But 37 is not a square number. So you can't get that square root of 36. I mean, you want it to be a square root of 36, but it's not. It's square root of 37. So from here, we're going to separate that out into two separate answers, because that's what your quadratic formula is. So you have 3 plus the square root of 37 all over 2, and 3 minus the square root of 37 all over 2. And those would be a satisfactory answer, but you might want to put them as a decimal. So if I use my calculator, and now I'm going to try to answer this 3 plus the square root of 37. So similar to the warm-up that you did today, so 3 plus the square root of 37. Now your calculator might be a little bit different, but if you do this 3 plus the square root of 37, you should get 9.08. 9.083 if we were to round, and that's got to be divided by 2 still. And then you do 3 minus the square root of 37. Again, your calculator might be a little bit different than mine, but if you did that correctly, you should get negative 3.083 divided by 2. So we can do one more step. So take that 9.0823 and divide it by 2. And so you get 4.54. and then do your negative 3.083 and divide by 2, and you get negative 1.54. So those are your two answers to this equation up here, is that x equals 4.54 and x equals negative 1.54. So that's how you end up with your decimal solutions for this equation that can't be factored. Being careful with your negative 3 being squared and how you answer and handle the subtracting a negative 28. Those are the key places students make a lot of mistakes when they're trying to solve an example similar to this. Hope that made sense, and good luck.